gonna start in about 2 minutes. Thank you. I hope you had nice lunch, and I hope everybody is now back and ready to dive into our next session. It's time to begin our second panel discussion for today. This panel will explore critical role that businesses play in evolving energy landscape from startups to multinational corporations. Our panelists will share insights into the opportunities and challenges of adopting renewable energy solutions, improving energy efficiency, and driving decarbonization goals. The conversation will highlight innovative strategies, market-based approaches, and financial mechanisms that can accelerate the adoption of clean energy. To guide this discussion, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator, Matthew Kilgariff, Ambassador of the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. With his deep expertise in sustainability and corporate engagement, Matthew is the perfect person to lead this vital conversation. Matthew, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. So this morning we've had faith and food, so it's time for fuel, and more broadly, energy. Energy accounts for 13% of global GDP. It's the center of our attention this afternoon, and in particular SDG 7, which can be summarized as affordable and clean energy. And just as a reminder, when we speak about energy, there are 4 parts of the value chain. There's production, distribution, storage, and consumption. And people tend to focus rather a lot on the production part of that, so that's adding renewables and subtracting fossils. That's on the production side. Distribution, I understand that the global grid needs to double in size to take over the renewable shift, where things are much closer to home. On storage, comes down to two things, water and chemicals, very simple. And then consumption, we hear a lot about efficiency and heat. For my panel, as we heard already from Maria, this is going to be on the private sector's role, specifically here in Serbia, and the private sector's role in the energy transition. So these are stormy seas, as we've seen this morning from the lectures, very stormy seas with opportunities, but also many, many challenges, and how to secure that energy transition here in Serbia, and for it to make commercial sense. We have the private sector on the panel. So our decarbonization goals, innovative solutions, commercial sense for affordable and clean energy. My panelists, first we have Maja Turkovic. She leads the European division of CWP. Many of you know it for windmills, but more importantly, it's now involved in grid-scale distribution, renewable generation, and storage. So you tick 3 of my 4 boxes. Well done, Maja. You're off to a good start. And then, to confuse you, we have 2 Nenads. First, we have Nenad Ristic, chemical engineer with the Elixir Group, which many of you know as an agro business. Very strong on phosphoric acids and fertilizers, but more and more these days also involved in the circular economy and eco-energy. So you tick 2 of my 3 or 4 boxes. And then we have Dr. Nenad Jovanovic, who has an unusual CV. He wasn't very good at school, but he managed to get a PhD nevertheless. He was just telling me about that after the break. He's best known as an energy modeler, and amongst other things, he co-authored Serbia's Integrated Energy and Climate Plan for 2030, including Vision for 2050. So a good thread, and a very knowledgeable chap, despite not being very good at school. Good enough. He's also got to be printed soon a book of very useful shortcuts. The long title is The Guidebook for Investors in Serbia in the Energy Transition, in Renewables. So a powerful panel to talk about power. Are they going to knock our socks off with their powerful answers? We'll see. Maya, let's start with you. You have 3 of the 4 boxes that we've talked about. You're involved in the generation, distribution, and storage. What challenges have you seen as a large industrial producer? What challenges have you faced in adopting the renewable energy solutions that we've heard about this morning?
Thank you. So where do I start? So challenges are many. We always start with the policy and regulation. So what investors need to start with is a very consistent policy, and predictable regulatory framework, which is what we keep, saying on all the conferences and meetings for 15 years here. Because we need this predictability, we do a long-term planning. So whenever there's some inconsistency, even change of regulation that is for better brings uncertainty, so that the investments of this size are very sensitive to unstable regulatory framework. And then this gets translated into, I would say, on the very operational level, on permitting, getting approvals, which in some countries, this is not Serbia, but some other countries, an EU country, can take as much as long as 10 years. And then when you add the time you need to spend to secure your project financing and then build your project, if it's a sizable, for example, wind project, a few hundred megawatts, it's 15 years. I mean, it's not a pace. This is like, it actually explains the curves we saw earlier today, You can't get anywhere if it takes that long, So these are 2, I would say this is like the first basket where I put with how much government can enable or disable investment in renewables by creating this environment and facilitating a fast permitting process, respecting all the standards, because then anyways, because of the lenders, we know we need to comply with all the environmental and social impact and stakeholder engagement plan and everything else. So we know we have to do it anyways to have our project bankable. Otherwise, it's never going to get built. But so this is one basket, the first basket, where we see basically the role of the government. The second one has, so speaking about money, investments are very capital intensive, as we know. In my view, there is enough money, so the sources of money are not scarce. What is scarce are good products or good projects, because this business has become very local, and then you would have local developers, many of which the first-time developers, and they are really struggling to deliver a bankable project, and then let alone to know how to pitch the investor to get financing in place. We'll speak later probably about the financing in more details, but this is general my view on money. Then when it comes to having a feasible project in terms of financing, in the region, not only Serbia, we do have the cost of money is higher than what you see elsewhere in Europe. In the EU, this is so you would, for example, have to have a really much better resource in terms of wind speed or the installation, if you're speaking about solar, just to match what you get in some EU countries, because the model is very sensitive to the cost of financing. This is one thing. And second, those are long payback periods, so this is not for every investor, This is, and I would say the expected return on investment is higher also than you see in other markets in Europe because of the country risk, obviously. So when you put all of that together, it's not that easy to bring to the finish line a good bankable project. And then on top of that, you have a high volatile electricity market. So this is a big challenge for investors to be able to predict, because this is our business. So this is what we do for a living, So we need to understand, what prices can we expect in the future. We have to sign, which is another, I would say, a challenge when it comes to financing. But we also speak later on about that, about securing the offtake. which has to have a proper tenor, duration, and this brings a lot of complexity. So the markets are very volatile. It's very hard to predict. It's also very hard to predict how much solar will be deployed in the region, because markets are coupling now. So this will be very relevant if the neighboring countries overbuild solar, even though if Serbia is lagging behind. Because what we see is basically solar, we have a cannibalization effect when it comes to solar. So this is really putting a big, the uncertainty on the feasibility, financial feasibility of the solar projects. Like, are we going to be able to secure the PPA price at the level that basically can justify the required return on investment? Supply chain and raw materials limitations of the transportation. And please, the very last comment that I have to say, because I was very much inspired by Professor Pollitt's speech this morning. So I don't know if we should bring a patriarch to our meetings at the ministry, but we see a big issue with the public acceptance and the comprehension of the importance of the grid agenda. And I believe this is like twofold thing. One is the political economy that is creating big inertia for change, general, because the whole infrastructure is built for fossil fuels. And all the lifestyle evolving around fossil fuels, and then you have vast interests around fossil fuels. So this is one thing, but the second thing is very cultural, which worries me the most. And this is where I think the social sciences should have a role in helping, this perception and awareness with the public. This is an issue. They even say that the more knowledge you gain is actually just strengthening your position on the climate change and green agenda, whatever that position was before, not making you change your mind. So for me, this is also very critical. It's not technical. I don't think the problem is technology. I don't think the problem is money. I think it's policy and the public awareness of the importance to do so. Thank you. I was maybe a little bit longer, but yeah.
Thank you, Maya. That was a broad sweep. I'll be coming back to the raw material topic with, I can't even say Dr. Nenond, my third speaker. We'll come back to that, the just transition topic and what that means for raw materials in a moment. But first, for Elixir Group, you're doing a lot of, you're a high energy user. It's the chemicals industry. We've heard in the literature the chemicals industry may be one of the last, like aviation, maybe one of the last to find alternative solutions. Could you talk to us about what challenges you're facing in your industry, converting raw materials into things that people want, whether that's agrochemicals or other things?
Hello, nice to be here. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share the panel with respectable colleagues with whom we are discussing these kind of topics all the time because we have very similar hurdles, I would say. From that perspective, I would like to agree with what Maya said. Basically, for an investor, predictability is everything. So from that perspective, a regulatory framework is the one which is the most important thing. For a potential investor to understand exactly what is he getting out of an investment long time in the future. So that's the general conclusion that I believe most of interested parties in this business will come to. Obviously, it really depends on what exactly are we talking about. If we are talking about wind, solar, renewable energy, per se, from that perspective, technology is getting better, and also price conditions on electricity itself could be also kind of favorable in certain situations. From that perspective, sometimes you do not need much of a legislative push in order to achieve these projects. It's mainly about predictability that no legislation will come in the way. On the other hand, if you're talking about other renewable projects, such as, for example, hydrogen, that will not be enough. Basically, you would need an additional legislative push to get these kind of projects with mandates Otherwise, thermodynamics will not allow you to produce on a cost that is actually compatible with alternatives in the market. As Elixir Group, obviously, we are following this market very closely, and we are creating our own decarbonization strategy, because it's not just that we are seeking for sustainable energy sources which we can long-term rely on in an unpredictable market. It's also a push from the market in terms of carbon footprints of the products. So that's why we are very interested in this business. Now, in terms of utilization of energy that you asked about, yes, indeed, the chemical industry is very intense in terms of energy requirements. We have both thermal requirements and electrical requirements on the electrical side. So from the energy mix side, sorry. So from that perspective, we have a strategy where we are looking for alternative energy sources, mainly reflecting in waste-to-energy projects that we are very interested in to get thermal energy that we need for our production. And these projects passed final investment decisions, and that's where the angle for Elixir Group is in terms of circular economy implementation. On the other side, on the electrical side of supply requirements, we are looking into potential collaborations, PPA agreements. However, we are also considering investing ourselves, because we are in a very interesting, I would say, project landscape where we are the ones that utilize the energy, so we do not have volatility on the offtake, which provides us additional certainty in terms of financial models that we can achieve. Nonetheless, as Maya pointed out, this is something we are following up closely, because the regulatory framework needs to be stable in order to achieve these goals and to get all the requirements necessary in order to complete the projects, which are very, I would say, very long in duration from initiation to completion.
Thank you. And if you could just clarify something for me and the audience. It sounded like there was an either-or in there. There's either we're going to make a deal with the power generators to decarbonize, because that's what our customers want in the agricultural sector, or we're going to make it ourselves. We're going to make our own energy. Did I understand that correctly?
That's absolutely correct. We are considering both options depending on the market needs. And actually, it can also be a mix of both in order to balance cash flows, in order to balance the energy grids on the local environment. So from that perspective, we are very open-minded. Luckily for us, we are in a position that we are the off-takers, so that provides us additional leverage in all of these discussions.
Good luck with both. And that takes us neatly to Dr. Jovanovic. I mentioned at the start, rather cruelly, that about your school record, but I was only repeating what you told me at school. But what you've impressed me with is your contribution to Serbia's action plan for energy. Now, you've just listened to some supply side and some demand side challenges. What would you like to add without duplicating on other challenges that you didn't hear in the last round of answers?
Yeah, thank you. So well, first of all, for those who don't know, Mott MacDonald doesn't develop projects that they build, nor they are suppliers to those projects. Mott MacDonald is in general, technical advisor or technical consultant that provides consultancy for all these activities you have heard. What I don't want to repeat, but basically to answer this question that we have here, or a sentence, the role of private sector in the energy transition is also from the consultant point of view, but also as a representative of association in Serbia, we try to share our knowledge with our clients, with our partners, and same as what we do with association. As you have mentioned, we have recently published the renewable energy guidance for the investors in Serbia, but similar guidance might be found outside. So it's not only for us to wait for the government to make regulation, for government to tell us what to do. What we believe is that first you innovate and then you regulate, if it has to be regulated. If there's no innovation, then there's no regulation, right? I mean, those two rhyme, but they were not on purpose because it's just a normal way it goes in business. So why I'm mentioning this is that any company, whether consultants as us or developers, you have to come with a certain culture. If you want to go towards energy transition, you have to make a decision to do that regardless of financial sheets, as what my colleague Nana mentioned, regardless of the risks that Maya mentioned. And to make it more practical, we can make a maybe short exercise here. Just raise a hand if you use public transport to go to work, to commute to work every day, or if you walk, or you have reached here walking or public transport. This is energy transition. It comes from us. Every journey starts with one step. We don't arrive to the goal immediately. We have to make a first step, but it starts with that group of people. And then if we start innovating, if we of course see that we can make profits, because without profits we wouldn't exist, the private sector wouldn't exist, then everything follows. And if you're determined within the company that you're going to follow energy transition, it depends on the country, it depends on the company, until which year, I'm not only mentioning for Serbia, but also a broader area, then you're going to innovate and also motivate your clients and your partners to do the same thing. Otherwise, if we are like alone and nobody does it, there's no energy transition. This is what I would add.
Thank you, Doctor. It's a good remedy to innovate and then regulate. Listening to some of the other Cambridge Five, their observations earlier, it sounded as though carrots and sticks in the regulatory form may be required for some things first to nudge behaviour. A change of theme now. I've heard a little bit of financial jargon already. Power purchase agreements, PPAs. I've heard cost of capital mentioned as well. So I'd like to turn the next round of questions into the nitty-gritty of financing this transition. Let's say here in Serbia. Why not? It's a relatively large playground. Could you talk to me about the financial models? Maya, you spoke already about the lengths of these projects and how to make them bankable, but could you just describe for us which financial models you typically use to make it all work?
Yeah, sure. It's, well, for the private sector and IPPs generally, we always do the non-recourse project finance. This is very standard thing, so equity and the traditional loans. We always try to make our project as good as possible to generate enough revenues to get the good leverage with the banks. What we notice is that lenders in general are kind of stuck in time, meaning they kind of still comprehend this is like 2010, where government gives you 15-year PPAs, feed-in tariffs, which is no longer obviously the case anywhere, I think, in the world. So the biggest, so an experienced developer or investor, we know how to develop a bankable project, okay? We have to have our financial model working in a sense that we satisfy the lender's criteria and comply with all the standards. And usually what we see is we like to have development banks. They bring a little bit of political leverage as well, and it's usually a combination of development banks and the commercial banks, I would say. And this is very classical project finance that you have. This is 99% of the cases for in our business. What's the problem? The problem is always the offtake. Once you satisfy everything I said before, it's the offtake. So we had feed-in tariffs, that period is gone. Now the governments, which basically pursue contract for difference auctions, do give prospect for projects actually to get built. Because out of all the projects we have seen, minus those that are government-owned, which come with the government PPAs, so I'm not counting them because they're not IPPs, obviously. There's only one project that got built with PPA signed with a trader. Everybody else basically is waiting for the auctions, where the government comes to play and says, I'm going to have 3 years consecutive auctions, this is the quotas, because this is how we make investment decisions. When the government announces, I'm going to auction 1 gigawatt in the next 3 years, then I can see, you know, if I can fit in, you know, time-wise, size-wise. This is what actually drives investment decision with the parties like us to start investing. Now, when you come to PPAs, one is the government PPA, or the CFD, which is basically a financial instrument, securing the fixed price. It's a contract for difference, double-sided. But then the physical offtake is, as well as the balancing responsibility, is something that you contract on the market. And usually what we have seen is that projects go to the utility and then sign the contract for the balancing and the route to market, meaning that physically the electricity will go to the utility, into the, I would say, the big mix of what all the electricity produced in Serbia for guaranteed supply, or maybe for the export, we don't know, because this is electricity. And the second option is something that still we don't have, I would say, a precedent or experience in Serbia. It's the corporate PPA, which is, for us, quite a new thing, while it's mainstreamed in most other countries in the world. I think in the regionally Croatia, I have seen the first corporate PPAs, other markets. In some, these are very small markets, and sometimes you don't have a big enough consumer. Well, in Serbia, I think stands out with that respect, because we have the biggest consumers, in nominal terms at least, with whom we can contract that. And then the main issue comes with the duration of the corporate PPA, which for us needs to be at least 10 years. That's the tenor that the lenders require. And also the challenge comes with actually selling the profile when it comes to the solar, because your consumption and our generation profile are not really a perfect match, which means that we still need a utility there with the contract, obviously, as a sliver, or, you know, which brings us down to the regulation, how we're going to structure all of that. I think the price is not an issue, because at least that box we checked, that, you know, green electricity is definitely cheaper than any other now and on the market. So I think this is incentive that is, and it's green and it's cheaper. Now, the other things should be easy to resolve, but we still don't see that happening. So probably Nenad can also have something to say with that regard, yeah?
Thank you, first of all, Maya. Fascinating, technical. One of my takeaways from that, not only your mastery of this topic, which I would expect, but also your view that the Serbian economy is in something of a time warp. It knows what it knows, but it has no practice in, let's call it, the latest fashion for these things. So I want to bring in now Nenad Ristic. You're a commercial company. We spoke a moment ago about the make or buy decision, and you're in the same country, and so you're in the same time warp. Can you outline for the audience, what financial mechanisms and models you're looking at now, in reality, and if you could jump into a 10-year time capsule and jump forward, what you'd like to see 10 years from now, so the present and then the future.
Thank you. So, in general, Maya covered a lot of ground. I would like to speak about a bit of different experiences. Obviously, we have a different situation as a consumer of energy, meaning that we find on the market quite good receptiveness of lending institutions, because we are a consumer. So we do not have a offtake issue, which resolves, I would say, a lot of uncertainty in terms of an investment. So from that perspective, the receptiveness of financial markets was very favorable to us, I would say. And we hope it's going to stay like that, because obviously all of the financial players have their own ESG goals that they're trying to align on a corporate level. Serbian financial institutions are obviously a part of a much bigger conglomerate in Europe and even the world in terms of financial sector. So from that perspective, we see a lot of receptiveness considering our particular position on the market. However, I fully agree with Maya and I understand her point of view because obviously we provide a certain certainty in that business which allows better bankability. In terms of project development, again, for us, we have a good financial situation from a perspective that we also are the ones that can provide the land as well. For us, we also like to focus on our main business, which from a perspective of investments, we much rather would like to invest in our general business strategies that we usually apply. And from that perspective, in a long aspect that you asked me, what we would like to see on the market, we would like to see much more corporate PPAs and very vivid market. And in order to get there, I would say it would be necessary, first of all, again, predictability on the regulatory framework, but there's also a need for a lot of grid balancing and aggregators, which can kind of bridge this gap that Maya was focusing on, that the energy mix of a producer and on a consumer does not exactly match. And now, currently, there is a legislative push to put on the table and into the market aggregators, which could potentially help in developing this market. Nonetheless, in terms of financing for us as a company is reasonably simple. First of all, coming back to what Nenad said already, in terms of values, we support this transition and we want to be a part of it very vividly. On the other hand, obviously, it needs to be backed by some financial models in order to have a long-term business sustainability. So from that perspective, yes, we are very interested in this market. We would like to see it flourish, and we hope that regulatory framework is going to facilitate that because, as Maya was explaining, it's not about the price of production. And from that perspective, it's always better to have specialized companies that can develop projects, and they will be the ones that do it in the most effective manner, and therefore you get the best price for the investment that is basically put into commission.
Thank you. It's clear to me, listening to the two of you, that the market, the energy market sophistication is on its way. The understanding is there, but the structure isn't yet. So it's coming. Maybe 10 years. There's a delivery problem. It's stuck at the gate. The sophisticated market structures, as you aggregators and so on, and market makers, market movers. It exists. We understand it, but it's not here yet, and not at the depth that it needs to be to ease a lot of these financial obstacles. So, Dr. Juranovic, you've heard. Are you a good mind reader? Do you have a good crystal ball? How many years before those structure problems are not problems anymore?
Thank you for this question, because I might bring some positive news. So just a small replica to Maya. The recent news, at least from our bankers here in Serbia, is that they need 5 years of corporate PPA, not 10, which is a really promising thing. Why I'm mentioning this? Is because just 2-3 years ago, I think that Maya and I were in the same panel talking with the British Chamber of Commerce, when I think somebody mentioned that if there is no incentive from the government in terms of feed-in tariffs, so feed-in tariffs are the most conservative instruments, financial instruments you can have, the banks will not loan money. So we are talking just 2 years or 3 years ago. Now the financial climate has changed. They say, okay, we can accept the auctions, which is the next step. But from just a month ago, we had a conference where they say, yeah, we can also accept the corporate PPA. So it's again a mindset, I would believe, not more the regulation, etc., that they can have risk financial models to understand what developers are saying, what consumers are saying, what consultants at the end are saying that this is possible because it's done in other countries. When will it come? For sure, or most of you are familiar with carbon adjusting mechanism. If for those of you who don't know, it will come in 2026. It will affect Western Balkans. It will affect the UK since Brexit. Why? I maybe mentioned something they shouldn't know. So EU has carbon prices. UK has carbon prices. In Western Balkans, we have, only in Montenegro, we have CO2 prices, which is not the ETS system. So when we talk about electricity markets, it's a bit distorted because we don't account for all the costs in the market. And we don't, even though we know, and it's mentioned by my colleagues, that renewables are cheaper than thermal, they're cheaper even without CO2 taxes, or call it whatever tax you want to call. And it has been shown the levelized cost of electricity coming from renewables is cheaper than the thermal. So from 2026, every exporter from, if I'm not mistaken, chemical industry, paper industry, iron, cement, and electricity, of course, they would have to pay the difference of the carbon footprint embedded in their product. If that product is electricity, if that product is cement or something else, they would have to embed this cost of CO2 and pay the difference in case of UK. Now, the CO2 in UK is lower than in Europe, so we have to take a difference of, I think it's 20 pounds at this moment. I didn't check results in the last few weeks. I should have, it's my job. But anyway, you would have to embed this cost there. In case of Serbia, we would have to take the entire CO2 cost. Does it make you competitive in the market? No. So then, somebody who imports your product from Serbia, from Balkan countries, they would have to embed this cost and they would figure out there's something wrong here. And it will eventually come to the build-up of what we are looking for to see in the market, because the market will regulate itself. We will have a price signal from the market and final establishment of corporate PPAs, whether they are 10 years, 5 years, 7 years. But if you know that after these 5 years, there's a demand for this kind of corporate PPAs, then you have to worry from the beginning. I know that there's a risk. Of course, you have to take into account what if after 5 years there's nobody buying it. But for sure, if they are pushed to do that, the demand will rise. And then once the demand rises for corporate PPAs, more developers will come and build solar power plants, wind power plants, waste to energy power plants, and any other renewable power plants.
So you've touched on some of the points raised by the Chamber of Commerce earlier in the day, and on the 5 years or 10 years, I can envisage a secondary market evolving in the options to trade the second 5 years to cover if one side wants 10, the other side wants 5. There's an opportunity there to create an interesting liquid market. Thank you to all three of you for giving us such technical answers to my technical question. Thank you. Staying on theme. Now a softer topic. It's around partnerships. And I wondered if you could each describe one of the successful partnerships that you've been part of outside the home, a professional partnership which has helped to accelerate these transitions, because my first questions were mostly about the obstacles and when will those obstacles be overcome. So now it's the good news part of the show. Working partnerships, what's helped you to accelerate the energy transition in your field? Maya.
Well, speaking about partnerships, yeah, on one hand, what we see very common is that you would have companies merge so that they enlarge the portfolio to get better access to the capital, which is something we did. But what I think is more, maybe we never did that, but this is something that is at play in Serbia and other countries in the region where the private companies would partner with the governments in order to build large projects that will be ultimately, so this is regulated by Serbian law and elsewhere. I think every country in Balkans has similar provision that allows the government to enter the strategic partnership with the private sector companies. And usually these contracts are subject, I mean, they are referred to very large projects. In Serbia, we have a very big 1 gigawatt project of solar that the private company is building for the government and utilities. So it will be operated and owned by the utilities once it's built. So basically transferred to the utility. So we see that model at play. So we see that in Serbia, we see it in Montenegro, we see some attempts in North Macedonia as well. I think this has become very common. On the private sector partnerships, they usually are part of the news, business news, where we see that one company has merged with another and we join forces to, accelerate, nothing more than that. And this is usually the bigger company would, merge or acquire the smaller one. We see that very common. This is nothing extraordinary. So when you ask me about partnership, the first thing that came to my mind is the basically public-private partnership as a model to accelerate the energy transition, because it comes with the sovereign guarantees and some other source of funding. So with that regard, it's quite different than what we are doing as a private sector. Yeah.
Thank you. They're both excellent examples. Public-private partnership on the one side, and then just regular corporate M&A on the other.
Yeah.
Thank you. Inad, a partnership you're proud of, a PEP that's not a PPA, but a partnership you're proud of that's seen Elixir accelerate its contribution to the energy transition. Nena.
So in general, obviously, it's best when companies or public institutions, consultants partner up and everybody brings to the table what he knows to do best. As Elixir, we have a great partnership that we recently announced with a German company K+S, for example, where we are focusing on production of commodities which are not available in local markets, and they are covering the distribution and creating the distribution market for the product. That helped us a lot accelerate. And coming back to the energy transition, these kind of projects are very important because, first of all, these commodities otherwise would need to be sourced from very long lead sources from, for example, China, India, or similar. Thereby, when we are shortening the supply chains, we have a much bigger advantage in reducing carbon footprint and also providing very special chemical formulas which also provide additional benefits in terms of reducing losses. And from that perspective, we are very proud of this partnership, which was announced recently, where we passed the FID already, and we are going to invest in a very particular contract setup. On a more general note, coming back to what I originally said, that everybody should bring to the table what he does best. Obviously, as Elixir Group, we collaborate a lot with consultant companies, which provide a lot of knowledge that we require in order to do the best possible transition, either in terms of electrical transition to electrical power or thermal power. Thereby, all of the projects that I was mentioning before are done in support of very specialized companies. So from that perspective, we are very proud to I would say, allow this kind of strategy to flourish and use the best possible knowledge in the market in order to drive the best projects that obviously help us as a company, but help the community more broadly.
Thank you. So a step-by-step, what I've heard there on the partnerships is, well, truly strategic. It's choosing your partners, whether it's input or output or both. shortening the chains, making it local, and let's say cheaper. If we take you called it the CAM, I also know it as CBAM, same thing. Addressing it before 26, smart, and it's an acceleration.
So I would just comment on this. Indeed, what Nana said is absolutely correct. Most of the companies locally that produce high volumes are going to be affected by carbon border adjustment mechanism, Elixir included, especially in the fertilizer business. And a lot of these efforts are coming from a perspective of energy security, first of all. Obviously, price is a big part of the complete financial models, but in the end of the day, also you need to be compliant with the European market and bridge the gap of CBAM to accommodate for ETS European system. Also, I think it would be very important long-term for Serbia to create a similar kind of scheme. Otherwise, you have unloyal competition on the local markets, because potentially Serbia does not have a mechanism which allows ETS or CO2 charging, and thereby also a lot of products can be flooded in from markets that want to avoid paying this kind of penalties, and they are creating very special market conditions which are disproportionately affecting companies which are trying to be compliant on a broader scale.
I think you're very clear. Your partnerships anticipate the future, and whilst addressing tomorrow morning's needs from your customers. Very nice. Dr. Jovanovic, partnerships for acceleration. What have you seen but not just heard?
Yeah. I mean, we also have tons of partnerships where we collaborate with our clients in energy transition worldwide. Just to mention that the reason why we are working in UK with Heathrow Airport, helping them to transition and change their fleet and use more electric vehicles, buses that they have there, and also to change to biofuels, etc. But I would like, because I've seen lots of, if I'm not mistaken, in the audience, participants from the Balkans at least, and maybe to give them additional information. The partnership that we are looking forward to is with IFIs, the international financial institutions, because if we don't have regulation in place and we don't have mechanism in place, at least we have European Union that provides lots of funds for these kind of projects. We have banks, as what we have mentioned, but again, through world banks, through EBRD and other, and the latest project that I can announce here officially that we kicked off in the Western Balkans is that European Union will finance the gap analysis of transmission system operators in the entire Western Balkan 6, and to check which are the gaps in the infrastructure to integrate a lot of renewables. So we have mentioned all about building renewable, but we haven't mentioned, can we integrate them? And the projections that we are working on will be 2030 and 2040. So it's a long term, as what Maya mentioned. We cannot think about tomorrow. We have to think about 10, 20 years in the future and see what's stopping us from integrating more renewables and go towards energy transition. So hopefully, energy community is also a partner in this project, so they will promote this towards stakeholders, which will be ministries of energy in the Western Balkan 6, and also the transmission system operators. And we are going to work on the analysis of transmission capacity, generation capacity, electricity markets, so how the energy will flow through different countries, and as well regulatory aspects, because at the end we have to provide some risk analysis and some gaps in the regulatory aspects in order to make this energy transition work.
I actually have tears in my eyes listening to that last remark. That is so heartwarming to hear that Western Balkans are included in those analyses. My understanding is that the electricity distribution infrastructure globally today is about 300 billion, and it needs to double to address the change in decentralization of energy and many other things. And what you've just described is the cap gap work that you'll be doing is is a way of taking the measure here of what's required, by when, and by who. So I am moved by your remarks. Thank you. Just pull myself together. To close, I wanted to ask you something that you can't possibly answer, just to see how you answer, which is about Serbia's nationally defined contributions. We know that Baku is happening now. We've heard from the Brazilian ambassador that we'll all be looking at Belém for COP30. That's the next venue, and somewhere in between, Serbia and about 192 other countries will have to resubmit their nationally defined contributions, I think by February next year. And I wondered what your personal views were, rather than your official views, but your personal views on what you already know about Serbia's nationally defined contributions and what you think about them. You're in that business. Do you know what the contributions are, and do you think they're pragmatic? I'd just like to hear your personal views, because we all have views.
So about NDC, I do not know. I assume Nenad knows. And so officially, I would have to learn first what the Serbian government intends to do, and then probably I can form my opinion. That's number one. But personally, what I think is that regardless what is written in the NDC, which is, something we'll discuss maybe 6 months or 1 year from today, I think the CBAM, this question is very sensitive for Serbia because of its dependence on fossil fuel and everything I talked about before. But I think CBAM alone is the biggest driver for energy transition. And this is all that matters, I think. The biggest factor that is going to accelerate energy transition is going to be CBAM, for a simple reason that I actually believe in price signals from the market. And for this reason, when I said that there's a very low acceptance and awareness of the importance of energy transition, it's very hard to sell something unless you can put a price tag on whatever you're selling. And the absence of that means that the public in the market do not get the proper signals, and CBAM is going to be the right one.
Dr. Ristic, a personal view from I'm not asking what does Elixir Group say, but what do you feel?
I need to declare ignorance on this one. I really do not know what is in the report and what was done on the general balancing on the energy mix in Serbia on a more broader spectrum. However, I see that a lot of things are put into regulation, and there are a lot of discussions in order to basically alternate certain fuels that we are using for our energy mixes, which is already a good sign. But more broadly speaking, I really hope we are successful in this as a country, because eventually CBAM is one thing for the private sector, but also as a country for the national system. I think it's in our best interest to comply. The reasons are different. One is first integration in the market that we are heavily dependent on, which is European Union. And on the other hand, more broadly speaking, we are not a big energy producer as Serbia. So for example, in 10, 20 years, the success rate of this kind of decarbonization it means also better local sustainability efficiency, which we need because actually we are to a large level dependent on imports. If not directly electricity, which is the general theme today, I would say, of most of our discussions, more broadly in terms of fossil fuels that we are using to support that network. So from that perspective, I really hope that long-term we are going to be successful. It's in our best interest.
Thank you, Doctor. So just before I go to Dr. Jovanovic, price signals, a bit of faith to revert to our Professor Pollitt this morning. There will be miracles because we need them. And now for someone who's probably read it You read the old one, and are you helping with the new one?
So fortunately or unfortunately, I know every page of the document because I had to develop the integrated energy climate plan for Serbia, which was done first time ever in European Union. It was developed 2018. UK also has it. Again, we mentioned Brexit. After Brexit, we have other documents, right? Slap in the face. 33% of reduction is not enough when we talk about emissions, right? Why I'm saying it's not enough is not ambitious enough. If you set a goal, which is a moderate goal, very probably you're not going to reach it. We all set goals in our life, and I'm glad if most of you can reach them, but usually we are so close. If we are more ambitious, we're going to put more efforts and more work to reach it. So even if we reach 50 or 60% of an ambitious goal, is much better contribution and effect than reaching 80, 90% of medium, low. I don't know how to phrase it. And this is Nenad talking, not Matt McDonald, not the association. You asked for a personal opinion. Talking about having green energy into the system. I'm talking now about energy, not only electricity, right? We are in the period of year when in Serbia and the Balkans, we have lots of pollution, not only because of thermal power plants, but because we use different sources to heat our homes, right? 60%, 60. So that's almost 2/3 of energy goes towards heating. If that energy is not clean, maybe you have seen some of you. I've took out my phone not to check if somebody called me. I've checked the quality of air. Is this AQI is 66, meaning it's not clean, meaning it's above 20 PM 2.5, the particulate matter 2.5, which is harmless for our life, right? I'm talking now seriously. I have small kids, 5 and 7. I'm really concerned about their health. And this is, as I say, Nenad speaking, not Matt McDonald, right? So if we give an effort to show decision makers that we can make more, and we talk about the private sector, so private sector can do more. Money is there, we have heard it. Recently we got, let's talk about electricity. Recently we got a publication which is called 10-Year Network Development Plan from our TSO saying that we can integrate 5.8 gigawatts of solar and wind into the system with the existing generation infrastructure. Why do we have in our public documents and plans only 3.4 up to 2030? What's stopping us to add this 2.4 that we can balance, that we can have into the system? Maybe I have the answers, maybe not, but this is a question for decision makers to say, where are we going?
Thank you. So to refresh my own memory and maybe some of yours, working backwards, we have far higher ambitions are needed to drive the next cycle. Better to reach half a high ambition than half a low ambition. Heat pumps are coming, I hope for the sake of your children, to replace the thermal heating and pollution to heat our homes in the winter. A leap of faith and an absolute belief in price signals, and the capital will come if the regulatory stability is there. So I hope all of those three things can be found in the next edition of Serbia's NDCs. Thank you for listening, and thank you to my three excellent panelists. Please give them your hand.
For our next Next panel will begin in around 2 minutes, so please come back to the room. Thank you. I hope everybody is ready to continue our next session, and it's time to begin our third panel discussion, so please come back to the room if you haven't yet. This panel will explore the diverse approaches regions are taking to navigate the global energy transition. Our esteemed panelists will discuss efforts to decarbonize energy systems, reduce reliance on fossil fuels, and advance renewable energy technologies. The sessions will also delve into international cooperation, cross-border initiatives, and the policies shaping the global energy landscape, all within the context of sustainable development. To guide us through these important conversations, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Borislav Miljanovic, founder and CEO of Represent System. With his extensive expertise and insights, Borislav will lead these dynamic discussions. Boro, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Marina. First of all, I don't want to waste your time because it already has been a long day here, and I would like to start immediately to introduce my panelists for today. Madam Norela Constantinescu, Deputy Director of the Innovation and Technology Center of IRENA. Welcome. Thank you for coming, and I hope that this afternoon will be interesting discussion from your point of view, because IRENA, it is interesting, how can I say, source of information for us.
Thank you. And I will bring the messages afterwards to Baku, maybe.
Thank you. Bobby Petsutic is the Chief Product and Product Definition and Offtake Officer on CWPP Global. Thank you for coming, and I hope that your Serbian or Yugoslavian name doesn't, bother other people, because we are going to talk in English. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, English is easier.
Yeah.
Mogu malo na našem, ali nije toliko dobro.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the last one, but not the least one, man in the end of this row, it's Branko Čevrić, Loan Officer, European Investment Bank. Man with a lot of titles. I saw from Serbia, Bosnia, and other regional, Slovenia. Thank you for coming, and welcome here in Metropole Hotel.
Thank you, Bora. Pleasure to be here, and looking forward to the discussion. Yes.
Okay, let's start with first question. I would like to start with a question to Norela. From an innovation perspective, what emerging technologies or practices are critical for accelerating the global energy transition, particularly in areas where renewable resources are less accessible? Because this is our topic today, energy transition, but in different parts of Europe.
So thank you for the question addressed to Irina. Borislav, what I would start with, it's, we were talking about hearts and minds. Now I'm talking about minds, not about hearts yet. Last year in COP 28 in Dubai, as Brazilian ambassador was mentioning, there was a change, I think, and this change at least fixed some objectives. I don't know, in the previous session somebody mentioned that it's good to have objectives. And this objective is of course related to sustainability through the use of renewables. So triple the renewables capacity by 2030 in comparison with last year. And IRENA, so my organization, was in charge to be the custodian and to monitor this tripling capacity. Last year, 2023, so I talk about practice, not about so much technologies for the moment. The year was the year with the most deployed capacity in the last, 10 years. 470 gigawatt. It's a lot, but it's not yet sufficient because we have to achieve 1 terawatt, so double per year. So the objective is there. We are half on the ambitious objective. The technology which was the most deployed and which is in a way on the track, it is solar PV. And this is because it was mentioned before, the levelized cost of electricity for solar PV and for wind onshore, they decreased abruptly in the last 10 years, 90% and respectively 70%. And it makes them actually cheaper than the levelized cost of electricity for the fossil fuel. Of course, not everything is in the levelized cost of electricity because there are other challenges we have to manage. But this is, in a way, the track we see. We have also not only the supply side. So as IRENA, we look, of course, at renewables, but in order to deploy those capacities and in order to integrate them, somebody was talking in the previous session about the integration, we need electrification, of course. It passes through electrification because this is the most efficient way to integrate mainly solar and wind because these are the most deployed capacities. And here we have, of course, transport sector, electromobility. We also have the heating and cooling sector. We have the what we called the hard-to-abate sector. And here are the industrial capacities. So steel and iron, petrochemical industry, which has to go also towards this electrification, towards this decarbonization. Now, the vectors which are chosen can be, on one hand, electrification, energy efficiency, but also in certain cases, hydrogen, due to the processes they have in place. The other three sectors, which belong to the transport sector, aviation, shipping, and heavy-duty vehicles, there the situation, it's a little bit more difficult. So it's a little bit more complex because they have to go, so they cannot use maybe all the time the direct electrification, so hydrogen is one need. I will maybe stop here with supply and demand. And in the middle, we have the infrastructure, the grids. And we have to take into account also the grids in order to integrate renewables. And what is coming, and especially when you have a certain percentage of renewables deployed, we have to go with the grids in parallel with the development of flexibility means, which the market session before was mentioning the aggregators, demand response, storage capacities, and so on. And this is, of course, in order to manage millions and millions of assets, because we have millions of assets. Of course, you cannot do this by human beings. So you have to have digitalization which can support the decision-making and also the operation and optimization. So this is a little bit more on the new technologies and what we see coming even more, because we have this in a way, fragmentation of the world and of the markets. We see more and more the geopolitical and the discussion about the supply chain and then, how we position in this field. Regarding renewables, which, the accessibility. I think in terms of natural resources, all the countries, they should have something. So either wind, solar, combination, geothermal, I don't know, hydro. So there are at least 6 of them which are under the radar of IRENA. The most important, it is indeed to have a framework which is put in place, which supports the deployment. And then I will talk maybe a little bit later about the manufacturing capacities and how this is distributed, because these capacities and the investments which I didn't mention, but I mention now, coming with the deployment of this almost half of terawatt, they were taking place in Europe, North America, and China. So the rest of the world, so they were accounting for 85%, but I will come later to this.
Thank you. Bobby, hydrogen is seen as a key element of the future, and you are in all the time in this business. What advancement in hydrogen technology we need to have it, to make it as a necessary, it a viable alternative across the multiply regions, and how it can work for us?
Thank you. Yeah. So just to introduce our company, so I work for CWP. We have a business here. My colleague Maya was speaking earlier, Joe. And this is a grid-connected business here. So we do grid-connected wind and solar across Central Europe. I work for a separate business, which is the hydrogen business. And this is a global business that has projects in a variety of locations, from North Africa to South America, to East and West Africa and North America. We're a hydrogen business, so we're not grid connected, and we build integrated renewable energy projects with hydrogen for export in a variety of products. Now to answer your question, a lot of the technology for green hydrogen exists today, and in fact has existed for a long time. Green hydrogen, so hydrogen via electrolysis, which is splitting water, H2O, into H2 and O with electricity. That's been around since 1800. It actually predates grey hydrogen production, the way hydrogen is currently made today from natural gas. So a lot of the basic elements are already there. A lot of people know green hydrogen is, the idea is to commonly convert it to green ammonia for transport or for use as a fuel. Ammonia synthesis has been around for probably about 100 years. So these elements are relatively tried and tested technologies. What perhaps still has some way to go. One is the combination of a lot of these technologies. No one yet has built a 3 gigawatt integrated wind and solar project all together, running electrolysis and then ammonia synthesis and even other downstream processes at once. This is something that is new and is still untested and requires certain very specific conditions. But also downstream of the hydrogen production, one needs to think about where that hydrogen is going to be applied. So if you think about shipping, you can replace traditional fossil fuels in ships with green ammonia. Green ammonia is made from green hydrogen. To do that, you need a ship that can burn green ammonia. If you put green ammonia in a ship today, it wouldn't be a good idea. So those engines need to be made, those ships need to be delivered. Some of those shipping companies are doing that today, but they're still, whilst ammonia-ready ships are being built, those ships can't really run on ammonia yet. So that's something that's still going to be developed, and getting that to a commercial scale solution will take a bit of time, probably 2030s. Think about other industries. For example, you can do, today, iron and steel is made with blast furnaces. So you have iron ore, which is iron mixed with oxygen. That's how you get iron in the world today. It's always mixed with oxygen. And to remove the oxygen, what you currently do is you take coal and you blast the iron ore with coal, and the carbon in the coal pulls out the oxygen and creates a lot of CO2, and you get metallic iron left. So that's how a blast furnace works. Tomorrow we'll be making that with both natural gas and green hydrogen. So the hydrogen binds with the oxygen and removes it as steam, so as H2O. That's how the oxygen is removed from the iron ore. That today kind of exists. So it's called DRI, direct reduced iron. Those plants currently run in places, and they have been running since the 60s, on natural gas. There's plants in Algeria, some are planned in Angola, there are plants in the Middle East doing this, but none yet run purely on hydrogen, or even majority on hydrogen. Some tests have been done in China, but this is still early stage. So again, getting that to commercial scale is still not quite there yet, but again, is not far off. So I guess these are some areas where the technology isn't fully developed at scale. And you know, these are big industrial processes. So it's not just sufficient to do this in a lab somewhere. It has to be developed on an industrial scale to make it work and to make it cost effective, because if it's not cost effective, it won't work. So yeah, I hope that answers the question a little bit.
I probably, you have some time scale. Is it 5 years? Is it 3 years? Or what do you expect it will be on these production sites, enough time to have something which will be reasonable to have it as a business?
I think the projects can be developed, it depends on the project. So some projects are going to, you know, particularly the scale projects, we are talking about fully integrated wind and solar, island mode, multi-gigawatt, you know, renewables with electrolysis and ammonia synthesis or electrolysis and iron reduction. These will take time to build, and they will cost billions and billions of dollars, and they'll be built in places where renewables resource is very good and the best, but those places are also places where there aren't many people because it's very windy and very sunny, so people don't live there. So this will take time, and I expect this will start happening in the early 2030s globally. There will be some earlier stage projects that I think can happen much earlier. So we have a project in Angola, which is a grid connected to existing hydro capacity. This is something that, compared to what I described earlier, is relatively plug and play. You can plug in an electrolyzer into that existing setup. There's infrastructure already there. And this is something we can bring online much more quickly towards the end of this decade or earlier, these types of projects. That's the same for other developers too. I think one of the key things is going to be what's the speed of the market, because that's the thing that's really going to drive how quickly these projects get developed.
Branko, are you ready to finance these multi-billion projects? Because we know that financing such a project is a very complex issue and questions, and European Investment Bank support projects in high-risk region or emerging markets. What are the challenges?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're not going to have a handshake today, but it's definitely something, I mean, definitely the bank is looking into innovative technologies. This is one of the pillars of our energy lending policy, both, let's say, matters mentioned, so hydrogen as well as the electrifications, EV chargers, etc. Now, going back, Bora, to your question, what challenges are we facing and risks? I mean, I know that there are only 3 panels, we have a lot of time, but still, of course, we have the usual suspects that risk that investors generally deal with in any infrastructure project that are connected to political risk, economic instability, currency risk, etc. And these indeed are addressed with, let's say, complex transactional structures, allocation of risk between various stakeholders. But maybe in the context of this conference, and in putting now the hat, because our bank has 2 hats. One is the pure banking side, the other one is being a climate and sustainable bank. Mm-hmm. Maybe to illuminate on risks that are very often, even though now we see a change in the dogma, are being neglected, and those are environmental and social risks, yes. These risks are very often downplayed or neglected by the promoters for a very simple reason, because they usually require a much longer period of project preparation, of course. And everybody wants to see, of course, the project up and running, wants to cut the red tape. But unfortunately, we have ample of examples in energy sector across the globe where promoters that were neglecting these environmental, social, climate, and even human rights issues have faced turmoil in big infrastructure projects. They were facing strong opposition from NGOs. They were facing legal battles, cost overruns, project delays, and of course that has an adverse effect on the financial aspect of the project, and more importantly, maybe on the reputation of all the stakeholders involved. So I believe these are the real challenges, especially in high risk and in emerging markets. That's why the European Investment Banks helps the promoters in already early stages to take this integrated approach. So in assessing these risks and in mitigating them in line with our environmental and social terms. And sometimes it's painful, it's costly, but it's sustainable. Maybe some examples. I mean, already the stage of what kind of investments are we pledged to dedicate. We dedicate also a lot of funding to climate action. This means climate mitigation. A very simple term means reduction of GHG emissions, so renewable energy. Sometimes we have interesting questions. For example, in a region we are supporting a project of a potential project of solar power plant on a previous coal plant that is being repurposed, and that of course clicks the box of climate mitigation. But then the promoter wanted to directly connect the grid to the mine that will close gradually, but it will still operate for a couple of years. So that basically clashes with one of our basic principles that we do not absolutely finance any kind of fossil fuel exploitation. Right? So these are some interesting questions. There may be one aspect in risk often also being neglected is the no harm principle, which is also something in the spirit of the EU taxonomy. For example, those are risks affecting the biodiversity and the ecosystem preservation. We know that in a lot of regions outside the EU, legislation has not yet adopted the protection of these, let's say, protected areas. So that's why IFI, such as EIB, play an important role here in the process of preparation of projects to make sure that these risks are also adequately addressed. And maybe a few examples on the social side. I mean, the list is very long, but just so that the public will understand what kind of issues are we dealing. I mean, very known issue in any infrastructure project is, of course, involuntary resettlement and stakeholder engagement. Of course, we often see in emerging regions, again, many promoters simplify these aspects, by saying, okay, we have a let's say in a public sector project, we have a concession, and then we gain legal rights, we have our expropriation, and then that's it. And it's not so simple. Sometimes, I mean, involuntary settlements, it really should be used according to international principles as a last resort. You should make sure already at the phase of preparation of project whether you have to change the location, the project design in order to prevent involuntary settlements, because you're going to have issues at a later stage, for sure. And same is with the stakeholder engagement plan. It's not just sufficient to have public consultation in the permitting process. Sometimes you need to include the public, give them access to certain information, and also allow them to have sort of a possibility to remedy, to recourse to legal actions. And maybe the last, because I think it was also an interesting hot topic last year was the checking the due recourse to the human rights in the entire supply chain. We had a case, of course, in a solar power plant where there was an issue. We know that, for example, roughly 50% of certain parts of supply chain are being produced in one, let's say, region in a big global economy. There's a production, for example, of polysilicon, and we know that many projects were relying on that part of the supply chain, but then it turned out to be that there were serious allegations of forced labor, and because this was not, of course, there needs to be a risk-based approach, but because this was not part of the due diligence, projects that were relying on that part of the supply chain that suffered some consequences. So there were disruptions. So these are also the things, of course, that we as a bank in a due diligence, of course, on a risk-based approach also consider. We ask the promoters to do the due diligence also in respect of this kind of aspects.
It looks like that your job is beyond the law, because you have to take all these parts, different in different countries, different regions, different aspects, and you are in charge at the end to be in the line of everything,
Absolutely, Bora. It depends really on, I mean, you asked me about the emerging regions, really. I mean, in the EU, of course, all these things and our standards are completely in line with the key. We have all the relevant legislation that fully corresponds to our ENS standards. There are no gaps, but in emerging regions, this is not the case. And sometimes even there are legislative efforts, but it's not being implemented adequately. So yes, that's why we have this important role as well. And first, of course, our role is to convince the promoters as I said in the beginning, what kind of consequences might they have if they do not address this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Norella, I know that IRENA emphasizes the importance of innovation in the energy systems. What role does international cooperation play in sharing and implementing new technologies across the region with different resources they need?
Thank you for this question. As I mentioned, and we launch, I don't know, in the month of October and up to now 2 or 3 reports actually, where we were trying to to monitor the deployment of the capacities, but also investments across the world in renewable technologies. And then I will come with what IRENA is doing. The ambassador asked me yesterday evening why a country in Pacific will be member of IRENA, because we have indeed also some frameworks which help actually this cooperation. So when looking across the world, of course, there is the political and the regulatory framework, which has to be there, has to be stable. On the other hand, there is the innovation drive, as well as the policy which was put in place in order to allow actually the deployment of all the clean technologies. Afterwards, of course, there are the financial resources and the mobilization of investments which can be carried out. And we see, similarly to the renewables deployment, the same regions are, are making most of the investments. So the country which invests, which actually, I don't know if they invest the most, but where the renewables were the most deployed is China. I mentioned 473 gigawatt last year. Out of this, I think more than 300 were in China, 3 gigawatt. Europe, with all the measures, around 70 gigawatt, and a little bit less in North America. So because they concentrate the production capacities for the clean technologies. China has now, I think, more or less approximately 1 terawatt of solar PV capacity for production. They are using only 50%. So they need actually to create markets and to push this deployment, including over their territory. So the investments are following those capacities, and in total last year in the energy transition, they were invested approximately $1.5 trillion. The numbers are big. It's becoming bigger and bigger. In total, to give you the perspective, I think up to 2050, globally we need to invest 150 trillion. So 1.5 per year, so gives you a little bit the perspective to 2050. So in renewables, the renewables, they represented 560 billion euros, out of which the investments, of course, they were again concentrated in US, China, Brazil, and Germany. So these are the countries which were investing the most. Now, what we can do to actually to balance and also at least to spread the knowledge. At the level of IRENA, we have what we call collaborative frameworks, where the member countries are gathered along certain themes, and where we exchange the best practice, and we support as IRENA the development of certain reports which create a kind of a level playing field for all those countries which are members of the collaborative frameworks. We have such collaborative frameworks for critical materials, which are needed for actually the development of renewables and also batteries and so on. We have also a collaborative framework for hydrogen, for example, where there is this exchange of best practice. So here are the countries which are sitting around the table. Then we have partnerships with the industrial sector, and there are two partnerships up to now. So one for the Alliance for Decarbonization of the Industry. So this is mainly for hard-to-abate sectors. And then the Alliance for the Utilities, UNESA. Furthermore, we are deploying our efforts and capacity building, including, for example, to support the energy planning in continents like Africa, and then we have really we are going to the different countries, so to Kenya, to Sudan, and so on, to actually support those countries to develop and to train actually locally the people to manage the planning, which afterwards, if it is used, it can actually reduce at least the capital costs. So if, because you have a kind of assessment which is done properly, and then the investments have more security maybe to flow towards that direction. I will stop here.
Yeah, okay. For me, it is really, let's say, complicated to cover how it is, you know, in different areas, in different countries, in different regions, because we see that China is so far away from us. But when we talk here in Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, what you see as a main problem to invest more money in the renewable?
So now I will use not the knowledge of IRENA. I have to use my previous knowledge from from my previous job. So I think the countries, so the Western Balkans, you are members of the energy community, and as such, actually you apply the acquis communautaire, and also in terms of what is coming from European Commission in terms of whatever, renewables, electricity grids, whatever, it is applied. And I had a check in IRENA with one colleague of mine. Last year, we were doing a kind of assessment of the national determined contribution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I'm sorry, I don't have the example of Serbia. And they were saying that it's a very good one because, of course, it's looking, and it was developed based on the principle of national climate and energy plans, which are ambitious enough. So in terms of the policy, I think this region, it's still, of course, staying well. But of course, the implementation has to follow. And then we talk about the financing, we talk about, I don't know, access to the funds of the European Union to a certain extent. So previously, in the previous panel, we talked about the grid. So all these projects of common interest, and which helps actually to develop a kind of pan-European energy system, which is well integrated, I would say.
Thank you. Bobby, you already explained that to us that it's very complicated to produce on a large scale hydrogen. But what about cross-border collaboration, and is it possible to somehow ensure better, development through better cooperation between countries and the regions?
Yeah, thank you. For hydrogen specifically, we believe cross-border cooperation will be essential. In Europe, for example, there's good renewables resource. However, Europe has huge electrification demands, so any resource that is available should predominantly go to electrification. We have a business here that does renewables development, and everything that it does is grid connected, selling electrons, and that's for a reason. In order to do green hydrogen at scale, and in order for green hydrogen to happen in the way that it's supposed to happen, as a large-scale decarbonization option of heavy industries, you'll need huge amounts of land that simply aren't available in Europe. For example, one ammonia synthesis loop or one DRI plant, so one kind of commercial scale iron reduction unit, requires about 100,000 hectares of upstream land, about 3.5 gigawatts. This simply isn't available at the scale that is needed in Europe. Also, there's better renewables resource out there, and indeed the very, very best renewables resource is not grid connected. It's very windy, it's very sunny, it's usually in desert locations. So in, for example, places like Morocco or Mauritania where we have projects. So in our view, and it doesn't need to be grid connected. You can make everything on an island. So you have your renewables resource, you have your downstream electrolysis, you have your iron production facilities, and that can sit in a very remote location. So you can take advantage of this excellent renewables resource in very remote regions, and then export the green hydrogen derivatives that you make. So in our view, doing this effectively, so that's doing green hydrogen effectively globally, means it will be a global business, and it won't be something that's local. Certainly at the moment, we see a lot of European green hydrogen projects, and there will be many in the future. But we thinking in the medium term and long term, this is much more likely to be a global business. And in terms of how that can be facilitated better, certainly we see a lot of the technology for green hydrogen coming from Europe. So Germany is a key player in this, and they make a lot of electrolyzers. And there's a lot of ambition for Europe to be a key technology leader in this space. And so I think it's going to come to finding how some of these European entities can collaborate with these other regions, so Northwest Africa, West Africa, South America, in order to fund these large-scale infrastructure projects that will make green hydrogen in these regions and allow cross-border cooperation, importing these hydrogen derivatives from these regions, and using our financial weight and expertise and technology to develop these regions.
Thank you. Branko, let's talk about policy making, and what is the best experience in the European countries, European Union, can be translated to emerging markets?
Yes. I mean, we're talking about, the list is long again, so I'll try to streamline it. I mean, one thing, and I know that everybody's been repeating that for years now, but still we need to emphasize it's still the fossil fuel dependency. It's still there. It's in the region, with the exception of Albania, still depends largely on fossil fuels. Of course, there are some improvements and projects being developed with renewable energy. Of course, they are, but still. And until that is the case, of course, renewable energy is less economically competitive. So you don't have a fair race, actually. So I think a big game changer in terms of policy will be, of course, the introduction of carbon price mechanisms. First, the CBAM, so the carbon border adjustment mechanism, also certificates of origin, which are used in EU, and something like ETS system that will be available. And this will create basically this level playing field and hopefully change this fossil fuel dependency, because it will put a fair price on this. Then, of course, also still a lot of regions, including ours, is still not tapping enough on the renewable energy potential, wind and solar, or the development is slow. I mean, there are various reasons for that. Of course, one of them is definitely also in certain countries, not all, some of them have made a great progress, is regulatory environment. So still the legislation on the that would promote and incentivize energy project is being slowly adopted or is subject to different changes. I mean, we've seen also in, for example, Romania, which is a EU country, and I think just a few years ago they've lifted the ban on the PPAs, on bilateral PPAs, and they introduced this contract for this difference market-based mechanisms. So that was EU. Huh? Not to mention, for example, in the region we still have, for example, Bosnia and Kosovo, that where the generation is very linked to the universal service obligation. That is basically, it depends on the tariffs and this, the tariff pricing, and this pricing is much low. I mean, it's lower than the recovery cost, so the cost of production, which is a problem for investor. No investor will enter into a market with such regulated prices below the. So these are some of the policy aspects. Then maybe, I mean, Dorella touched upon the NECP, so National Energy and Climate Plan. Of course, all the countries, for example, in the region, but also are like obliged to prepare it in accordance with the energy community. I mean, here what I see in terms of policy is it's written well, but sometimes there's lack of clear prioritization. I mean, I think there was probably was also discussing this, but now I think the awareness is there. For example, a few years ago, everybody was just talking renewables. Let's increase the capacity of renewables, but we were forgetting about the grids. And now, eventually, we came to the conclusion that the grids in the region, for example, our region, are really old and will not be able to sustain all these capacities. For example, they're also not resilient to climate change. We've seen it. We had blackouts recently because this current infrastructure, not only grids, but the entire infrastructure cannot cope with the extreme weather conditions that we are often seeing in the region. So this is something that...
Now just about time to start worry about that.
Exactly, exactly. And now we're approaching the season. So. But this is something. So, but now I think it's, you know, the importance is there. So the investments need to increase. I mean, here we're proudly also financing and developing projects in the region, in Serbia and in Bosnia and elsewhere, and also replicating models from EU. Maybe one thing that we also tend to see that is written on paper, but countries forget in their plan is the just transition cost. So this is dealing with inevitable economical and social challenges as a consequence of closure of certain mines. You know, we have a lot of mines in the region. A lot of people will be impacted by that, and this is a cost. So we need to invest and basically invest into an economic transformation of large communities. You know, to reskill them, requalify them, and this is a cost. So it needs to be factored in also when you're making policies, energy policies. Maybe it was mentioned I mean, one of the things, of course, since we're talking about cross-border cooperation, is the interregional, interregional connection. So, of course, which requires, again, investments in transmission lines and storage capacity. This is extremely important as well. I mean, you can manage the balancing capacities with export and export, and as well, it has an effect, of course, on pricing. It's the same as international trade does for many goods. And maybe last, but certainly not the least, which we're seeing and experiencing also in EU, is the lack of skilled workforce. I think in EU there was a study that showed that in order to meet all the targets, almost 4 million of climate-related highly qualified jobs will be required until 2030. I'm sure that is the issue in many regions as well, especially in the regions that are already dealing with the brain drain, lack of high qualified workforce. I mean, this region is a good example. A poor demographic structure definitely is not in favor. So I think policies that will should already be there to prevent brain drain, but also had to be linked to this energy transition, and to keep the skilled workforce here to be able to deliver on these targets, it will be also extremely important.
Branko, you and Rela, you both touched that question of the grid that is now a big issue and and it will be bigger and bigger issue. What's your expectation? How much money, how much time do we need to invest in this region? Because I know that you are in previous business, you are covering a region of this. How do you see that problem? How it will be solved?
Yeah, now I don't talk as Irina, I talk
Yeah,
with my previous knowledge. If I recall correctly, by 2050, only in transmission lines. So this includes not only the cross-border interconnectors, but also the national development. I think it was around 700 billion by 2050. So it's 700 billions by 2050. So it's quite a lot. By 2050. Up to 2030, the estimation was around 200 billion for transmission, and I think 500 billion for the distribution grid. So this is important in Europe because indeed, not everywhere, but we reach a certain level of deployment of renewables that we cannot ignore the grids anymore. And we also have to respect, because we can have competing objectives in a way. So we have to bring a kind of convergence. On one hand, of course, we have the sustainability, the renewables deployment, but we also, as Europeans, we are very attached to the security of supply, to electricity security of supply. We don't allow ourselves to have blackouts and so on. So therefore, we have to really have a kind of strong grid. And the European grid, it is strong, but it was let aside. So Europe pushed a lot the renewables, and the discussion about grids was taking a little bit more time. I think in the last 2 years started to be raised at also the right level. And now, we went into internal electricity market. Of course, we made the market design reform in May this year. So we were talking about the contract for difference and so on. This is one thing, but still we need actually to deploy those assets. And from my previous job, I remember, so there was a queue of TSOs for actually deploying the grid for offshore. And the manufacturers were actually just, first come, first served, based on the capacity you order. So if you order a smaller capacity, you are the last in the queue and you wait 10 years, which is, the supply chain bottlenecks have also to be removed. And we, as Europeans, we wanted to do this with, of course, European technologies. And this is right, and there was the Net Zero Industry Act, which was adopted.
Even though that is more expensive than maybe some other.
Yeah, could be. But there we have to, of course, to integrate the sustainability criteria. So there is a question of investments, there is a question of supply chains, I think, for the grids. But it's also a question of still going for this electricity integrated market, because when you have an interconnected system, you reduce by 20, grosso modo, by 20% your flexibility needs, which you will require when you come with more renewables.
Branko, do you know something more about the local situation? Because we saw that something happened in Montenegro and whole Bosnia are without electricity.
Yes. I mean, just to answer your question, I mean, investment needs are huge, but you need to start somewhere. So, I mean, you have some basic, let's say, rehabilitation of, let's say, only distribution grids, investing in low, medium voltage trafo station. Already that would help. These are, and these are regular maintenance. And sometimes even those are not performed because we have, as I said, the issues with the prices. Some countries are even adopting tariff systems. And then, of course, our large investments, smart metering, digitalization of lines, etc., distribution lines. Transmission projects are currently in preparation, yes, indifferent, but still not happening.
Yeah.
Not happening fast enough. I mean, what is a good sign, maybe just to say, is that now under the new reform and growth facility that you adopted in the energy sector, for example, they have put an emphasis on this. For example, the solar and the wind will no longer be supported with grants, direct grants, especially not in the public sector, because now it is expected that private market, both developers and financial institutions will tap into this. But that's why we have more resources now for this, for transmission, for grants. So hopefully this is a good momentum now to invest. And I think awareness is there, but we need to, as I said, we need to take advantage of this momentum. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, for the, let's say, last question, Bobby, for you. This morning we heard from Professor that it will be good to have some, maybe probably world government to take care about situation, but we unfortunately don't have it yet. And that is also a really good question for artificial intelligence, because without some kind of world government control of artificial intelligence, who knows what will happen. But for hydrogen, what do you need for this? Because we see that it's global business. What kind of worldwide system or laws, or what kind of improvement in that area you need it?
Yeah, it's a good question. A global government would be a good place to start. I mean, it's interesting. The key thing for hydrogen is regulatory pressure. I mean, hydrogen is, relative to other forms of decarbonization, which are maybe, a bit easier. Hydrogen is relatively expensive as a way of decarbonizing, but that's simply because these are hard-to-abate sectors that hydrogen is tackling. It's interesting, when you look at, for example, the shipping industry, many people don't know this, but the shipping industry is governed by the International Maritime Organization, which is a UN body that regulates shipping. And it's kind of amazing. All of the member states have more or less agreed on a trajectory to net zero. So this includes a pretty steep reduction of CO2 in the shipping industry, and they're currently legislating this. So this is happening as we speak, and it's going to be finalized probably by this time next year. And this is about as close as you're going to get to a global CO2 tax. So it's kind of amazing. I mean, this is something that, the Financial Times will write an article about. Wouldn't it be incredible if we had a global CO2 tax? And many, people will kind of fantasize about this. But the shipping industry is already well on its way to having a pretty high CO2 tax, and that will be global. And that's currently supported by member states that include, China, the US, Brazil, Argentina, member states who you would traditionally assume would be against this kind of thing. So we're already seeing a lot of progress in this regard. And I think the key thing also is to make sure that any regulation that gets enacted makes kind of commercial sense. So don't force hydrogen into places where hydrogen doesn't belong. Economic gravity will always win. And if you're pushing hydrogen into a field where there's a cheaper decarbonization option, so things like home heating, or things like maybe cars, where EVs are a cheaper decarbonization option, that just simply won't work in the long run. Ultimately the economics will come back and wipe it out, right? So I think the key thing is to reserve hydrogen for the places where hydrogen is needed, so long distance transport like shipping, where molecules are needed. Maybe, aviation for some synthetic aviation fuels. Things like ion reduction, where you need, again, a chemical reductant. These are the kind of places where hydrogen should be reserved, because it is expensive as a way of doing it, and this is where it should be supported.
Thank you. Norella, for your closing question, what do you think, which steps governments and big businesses should take it in that kind of balancing in short needs for energy and long steps for, be green and be sustainable?
So in the beginning of today's session, so the professor just showed that we are far away actually for reaching the 1.5 degree deviation according to the Paris Agreement. But the ambition is still there. So we have this vision on long term. And as Irina, so when we came, and I think it was also together with the International Energy Agency, and also with so many countries which actually signed this pledge to triple the renewable capacity by 2030. So this is a kind of milestone we have to reach in order to achieve that that objective by 2050. I don't know if we will do it. For the moment, we are not okay, so we are behind the track. But I think this type of targets and objectives, they motivate. So it's good to have. Of course, beyond that comes the question about affordability, comes the question about the competitiveness of our economies. And in Europe, Mario Draghi was mentioning it in its report that Europe doesn't go very well, actually, that we have quite high energy prices, and we can see already in certain countries and certain industrial sectors that this is hitting us. So we have to also balance these objectives with a kind of reality check. And theoretically, we have the targets. We have these national determined contributions, which indeed have to be revised by February, I think, next year, 2025. We see that in this case, the ambition, at least what was issued until now, it's so the ones which are new, of course, they become more ambitious, but the old ones, they are really, they just, we will just be half of this tripling pledge by 2030. But political and policy and regulation, it's not sufficient. You mentioned, indeed, the implementation, it's important. And there we have to act on the chain in the energy sector, but not only in the energy sector. So we have to look at the transport sector, we have to look at industrial application, and we need to understand also the people behavior. I will give, so in order to put this together, of course, you need a kind of planning, not like in the old communist time where everything was planned together, but still a planning and an understanding of this cross-sector and also societal dimension. Looking at supply, demand, but also the enablers. So we mentioned the grid infrastructure, but also skills, and also, of course, the investments. I would give an example, not from Irina, but we looked, for example, at heavy-duty vehicles in my previous organization, and Irina demonstrated the same thing. So we were saying that for heavy-duty vehicle, it's hard to obey sector use fuel cells, hydrogen. No, it's not okay. By 2030, because the batteries and the cost of ownership, it's, the business model shows that actually the batteries will be probably those which are going to be used. Of course, you have to define, the categories of heavy-duty vehicles, but this type of trying to understand the other sector perspective, when
Yeah.
even you do planning and the modeling, it's important. So when
it will be a lot of changes in the step by step.
exactly,
Yeah.
because then we just live in in a kind of dream.
Yeah.
Like hydrogen, when TSOs they started to talk about, they said no, I have to so I will need the electrolyzer here because I need flexibility. And afterwards we learned that actually the first use is for the industrial application, and then value stacking, yes, if can provide also flexibility, it's fine, but the first use is for the industrial application. So understanding other sectors' needs and business models, it's important in that.
Okay.
So I will
Yeah.
stop here.
Thank you. And let's finishing this conversation, Branko, with you. What is your expectation? How do you see the role of financial institutions like European Investment Bank in this helping the region in creating strategies for the future?
Yeah, thank you. I'm conscious of time. I mean, I should be quick. This is our value proposition. No, but in terms of strategy, first, I mean, I'm going to make a sort of a, I want to talk on behalf of our fellow colleagues from other institutions, but strategy-wise, we do have an advisory together with the European Commission. It's called Jasper, that helps authorities also develop different strategies. But notably some other, for example, IFI like World Bank, we were talking before about just example of just transition. This is this is what the core of the work. They're already doing a pilot, for example, in Bosnia, where we are also collaborating. In terms of strategy, they help governments to prepare roadmaps, which then result in projects. So this is one assistance on a strategy level. Maybe again, to be more concrete, we mentioned today this market-based incentive approach when it comes to renewables. Our colleagues from EBRD were the ones that were helped Serbian authorities to prepare legislation and organize these auctions. They had a similar assistance in Albania. Then on the pure project level, this is where we also have a lot of instruments I mentioned before. So we have I mean, already as a bank, we have in-house experts, engineers that are specialists in a specific sector, be it renewable, be it innovative technologies, and also environmental and social specialists. So they help the promoters, the governments to develop projects, prepare them in line with what I said. And we also use the technical assistance from different funds to sometimes to use for these purposes. Of course, the most obvious thing is our financing. So loans, which can be blended then with grants from EU, where we basically manage these grants as a mandate. And here, of course, we pledged, I mean, on a global level, we pledged to invest from 2021 to 2030, 1 trillion for green investments. We have reached roughly 400 billion. We'll reach it this year, so we're on a steady track. And of course, we have a great focus also in these investments in the region. So I think investments in energy have really become a very important priority in all the sectors I mentioned before. So renewables, grids transmission. We didn't mention energy efficiency. Just transition. And one important thing which I didn't mention is that we also have what our bank does is we finance also financial intermediaries, so commercial banks through intermediate loans and guarantees. And there we provide different financial incentives, rebates on interest rates that are transferred to the final beneficiaries if they follow a certain green agenda, green financing. So, for example, putting a solar on a roof house, and also businesses that invest in it. In addition, we provide technical assistance for them to basically identify these investments to the commercial bank. So this is how we pass through and also have an impact on a private sector, not only the big, large infrastructure investments that we were discussing before. Yeah, I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Please have a big applause for our guests. And now, Marina, the floor is yours again.
Thank you very much. We are a bit behind the schedule, so the next panel will begin shortly. You have around 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. Thank you. Okay, you're all in the front now. I hope you're ready for the final panel of the day. This discussion will focus on the unique challenges and opportunities faced by emerging markets in their journey towards a sustainable energy future. Our esteemed panelists will explore key issues around energy transition, security, and the innovative approaches that can drive development in these rapidly transforming regions. With a focus on practical solutions and forward-thinking policies, this session will highlight pathways to achieving a secure, sustainable, and inclusive energy future. To guide this discussion, I'm honored to introduce our moderator, Ambassador Dragan Županjevac. With his deep institutional knowledge and experience, he will expertly lead the conversation with our distinguished panelists. Dragan, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Marina. The hour is late. It is almost tea time in England, and we have quite a few friends from the UK. We've been at this conference now for almost 8 hours, so I would like to congratulate you that you have endured this conference, but I think it was an exceptional conference. We had some fantastic speakers and presentations, of course, by the Ambassador of Brazil, who has agreed not only to be a keynote speaker today, but to stay with us at this late hour at this panel, and also by Professor Michael Pollitt, who had a resounding speech in the morning and was telling us basically that we should pray and hope for the best. What the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, on Monday, when he was giving his keynote speech in Baku in Azerbaijan, was saying that this year has been the hottest on record, and most probably the next one will be even hotter. And Antonio Guterres was insisting that the clock is ticking. We're running out of time. We are approaching the abyss, and it's not clear what the future holds. Now, Professor Michael Pollitt was saying that all our endeavors and efforts to stop this threat of climate change have basically not brought the results that we have wished for. And he's sort of saying we need a Star Trek solution, we need a global government, we need a miracle. Ambassador of Brazil was insisting that on urgency. He was telling us that the Amazon are not the lungs of the planet. They are just helping suck in CO2 from the Brazilian area, but that Brazil is making some important strides. And he told us very, very interestingly that an electric car in Germany produces more CO2 emission than a car in Brazil that runs on alcohol. So he's a little more optimistic. Because we're talking about emerging markets, my friend Brian Mutembe, I was ambassador in Kenya for 6 years until last year, who is the advisor to President Ruto from a major important country in sub-Saharan Africa, has joined us. He flew in all the way from Nairobi, and I will ask him also some questions. But my question to you all is, again, do you think it's late? And do we really have a window of opportunity to save the day? So, Professor Pollitt, are you really so pessimistic? Do we really have to wait for a miracle, or is there still a chance to survive?
I am pessimistic. I think it's difficult not to be pessimistic about this because I think people misunderstand. I mean, I think not in this room, but there is a huge amount of doublethink around. I mean, I was in the US last week, and in the US, I was in Louisiana, and I heard people talk about, oil and gas and how there was absolutely no way that the US could wean itself off oil and gas, and the Gulf of Mexico region, where a lot of the oil and gas was coming ashore into Louisiana and into Texas. And at the same time, of course, we have all these clients in Europe who want to know how much emissions are being generated in the oil and gas supply chain. So we've got to do something to clean up our emissions from our refineries and from our supply chain. Oh, and of course, there may be an opportunity to capture CO2 and get somebody to pay us to put it in the ground. And I could feel the doublethink. It was sort of palpable that the economic incentives are very clear, that, the economic incentives globally are still pump oil and gas, and there's a bit of incentive on the side to do something clean, okay, at the global level. And we need to realize that, that is the reality globally. When I was in China at the beginning of September, where I was in a really interesting meeting where the World Bank were talking to the Chinese government, and they were saying, China needs to get off coal, and the Chinese were saying, yeah, we totally accept the reality of climate change. We believe in the science. We know that the Chinese climate is being affected by this. But, you need to be realistic. We've got millions of jobs tied up in both coal mining and in the coal equipment production sector. And we're going to keep on building coal plants out into the 2030s simply because we have to. Yeah, we can potentially reduce the amount of coal we burn in those coal-powered power plants, but the idea that we're going to wean ourselves off coal as quickly as the World Bank might like us to, that is unrealistic. So the global reality is the incentives at the global level do not exist, even though there are many of these micro incentives around the place, at the fringes. So you tell me whether that's optimistic or pessimistic. That's the reality.
Thank you very much, Professor. You are definitely sticking to your arguments, and I would love Ambassador of Brazil to give another point of view. Brazil is really a leading country in the fight against climate change, as he has mentioned, and I also had the opportunity when I was much younger. I participated at the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, which was also explained to have been the Wild West, but then Rio +20 happened, and Brazil is still at the cutting edge and really a leading country with some of the best diplomats on the multilateral stage. I know that the ambassadors of Brazil, for example, in United Nations Environment Programs, were always the top ambassadors. So Brazil is very strong, and we are very proud to have the ambassador today with us. Of course, Brazil is going to be the host of COP30 next year and is also organizing all of these summits. Do you share this pessimism of the professor, Ambassador? You have to turn on the mic.
Okay, I'd like to put in a grain of salt in this pessimism, if I may. It's true that what you've mentioned, Professor, and this has to be said. It's true that there is a new president in the United States who has promised to drill, as he mentioned. There will be more hydrocarbons in the market. So from that perspective, the hydrocarbons will continue for a longer time to be our main source of generation of energy for both heating, for both powering plants and eventually also automobiles. But there are alternatives. I would say that, and scaling it down to Serbia, Serbia is the size of Brazil's most developed state. The state of Santa Catarina has a 15,000 per capita income and the same population as your country. So it has the highest per capita income in the country. There are solutions that you may choose, and there are solutions which will diminish your dependence on synthetic fuels, that will diminish your dependence on foreign suppliers. I understand that 20% of the oil that you produce is exploited by a Russian company, but it is on Serbian soil, so it is yours. Then you have the power generation here has been done by your coal plants, if you want to call them coal plants. It's a certain type of coal, which is not very friendly towards the environment. And then you have an old and aging series of hydroelectric plants which constitute a good base, important base for the generation of electricity in Serbia. But I brought last month, I brought a specialist from Brazil who spoke to your president, to your prime minister, to representatives from MK, from Delta, and from other companies here in Serbia, showing them that when we began our biofuels program, we began small. The technology that we had available to move our automobiles was a primitive technology. And I'll very briefly tell you that I had my first car was a Volkswagen Beetle from 1981. It was a used car, bought in 1980 by my father. We were three brothers using the same car. This Volkswagen Beetle ran on 100% alcohol. So every day in the morning, my garage was underground. I would arrive in the car, close the door, and I would press a button that would inject gasoline into the carburetor. Remember what the carburetor is? Some of you may remember, some of you don't know what it is. And then I would turn on the engine and pull the choke. Most of you don't know what the choke is. And then we'll leave on the engine for 10 minutes. And only after that, the car was warm enough, the engine was warm enough for me to get out of the underground garage. Today, with the technology, with the improvement of the use of biofuels and the network that we have, you can drive your biofuels automobile without any problem at all. And this is Serbia. This is something that Serbia can do. You produce twice the grains that you consume, both for animal and for human use, for human consumption. And I can guarantee you that either in biodiesel form or in ethanol form, you will generate 90% less greenhouse emissions, for starters. And you will be less dependent on foreign suppliers. You would help your students coming out of your universities to stay in Serbia to work and research developments on this specific biofuel sector by generating sustainable air fuel, by generating bunker fuel that you could sell overseas. And this is something that you do domestically without resorting to any foreign suppliers. So, as I mentioned, this is up to you to decide. You may work with this incrementally. It doesn't have to work like we have in Brazil now, 27% mixture of ethanol into gasoline, 14% mixture of biodiesel into diesel, plus 100% alcohol for flex fuel engines, which are 20 million vehicles running around Brazil today. Doesn't have to start with that. By the way, since we began our program 40, 50 years ago, we saved approximately $800 billion in imports, which we did not make, thanks to this program. So it's up to you to decide. You have alternatives. And this is what we would like to offer you. For those who are interested, I have 2 booklets on this program, if any of you are interested in taking this home. And this is my small contribution to this end of conference. If I can discuss, debate anything else with you, gladly. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that initiative. I hope our government is listening to you very, very carefully, because it's an innovative way to solve our greenhouse gas emissions, and it should be taken seriously. And I'm sure that our delegations will be going to Brazil to these conferences next year. And my friend Ambassador Ristich, I will talk to, and we'll see that we can work on this maybe together. I'm back in the foreign ministry again working, so this is a valuable idea. But Brian, you come from Kenya, which is a country that does not emit a lot of greenhouse gases. You're getting most of your energy from geothermal sources. Coal is basically being phased out. I was in Kenya when the Chinese wanted to build a coal power plant in Lamu, and then that was just discarded. It was abandoned. Yet, and Kenya is playing a leading role. President Ruto organized the African Climate Summit last year in Nairobi, which was attended by all the top leaders of the world. We had Ursula von der Leyen, we had John Kerry, we had Antonio Guterres, everybody was in Nairobi. And yet, your part of the world, East Africa, is affected by extreme weather events, and you are feeling the pain. We had these 5 years of extreme drought in northern Kenya, affecting also Somalia, Ethiopia. People are dying, and it's not your fault. You didn't contribute at all. And then you have this question of these loans, which are too expensive for African countries. The concessionality is not there. So how do you see it? You're not to blame. You're feeling the pain. And yet you're doing everything right.
Thank you. The good thing is Ambassador spent quite a lot of time in Kenya, so he's got quite a lot of information in regards not just to Kenya, but the region. As you rightfully put it, today Kenya's, our total energy, we at 91.4% of renewable energy. This is a combination, of course, of hydro, wind, solar, and geothermal. And as you've put it rightfully again, there has been a complete resistance, from even the public on, for example, the coal. And you rightfully mentioned one that was intended for an area called Lamu. On top of it, if you look at our forest cover again, it's still, at a very good extent, still okay. And a good example is, even while it is still okay, right now the government, led by President William Ruto, is running a 15 billion tree planting program, which is a 10-year program ending in 2032. Now, with all these efforts together, I'll give you a very interesting thing I was telling Professor earlier during the lunch. When I was growing up, our grandparents who had not had the privilege of seeing the doors of a school unless visiting their children would tell us on which particular day to carry a raincoat, because that particular day it will rain. And a good example, last weekend I spent some time in the village running the 15 billion program, which I'm particularly in charge of 4 billion trees. And I give the people, because sometimes you must break it in a language that the people understand. Even as we sit here, we must break it into a language that we fully understand. And I give the people of the place that I was in a very good example that until 5 years ago or so, the rains would begin on the 14th of October. And if they were late, they would begin on the 15th. Now, this year, I was there last weekend, so the rains had just begun the day before, which was on last Friday, which was pretty a month late. Now, this and many others, I farm myself, in my world of business, I'm a commercial farmer. And for the first time, Zambia has under zero production this year, experiencing the worst drought ever in the history. Now, this affects, of course, the likes of us in Kenya, because Zambia is our main supplier of soya, and many others, you know. Now, these are not our doing. And of course, there has been the usual blame game, you know, this one did this one didn't do this, which is our usual story, as I said, when we go to the COP. Because we go there, one group complains, blames the other, we pass the blame, we argue a little bit, then we promise to meet each other in the next. I'm sure now somewhere in a conference room like this in Baku, there is that conversation, and the conclusion will be, let's meet in Brazil. Because we were in Dubai, we met in Brazil. Now, what do? The previous panel discussed, for example, on the question of hydrogen. Now, if you look at Kenya and Uganda, for example, who are immediate neighbors, one, they are both doing above 90% clean energy. Number two, they have plenty of land. Number three, they have labor. You know, quite a young, very young actually population. And when I say young population, we are talking of average age of 21. The average age of the population in Kenya or in Uganda is averaging 21 years of age. Pretty educated, with a bachelor's degree being a basic now qualification. Now, how do we resolve this issue? Today, if you look at Kenya as an example, where I come from, we've been struggling in the last 24 months because of debt. Debt which is pretty expensive, you know. If we sit down and relook at it and see how do we work on cross-border support or interregional support, I believe, as the previous panel said, it is very difficult for him to find clean hydrogen here, because there's the issue of land, there's the issue of clean energy, but we can intertwine with, for example, Kenya. And this is where we must be able to sit down and address all these factors and look at the question, for example, when it comes to the question of money or the question of the loans. How do we balance? How do we look at the advantages versus the disadvantages that are being caused by this? Because as much as we don't want to be the crybaby and say that, no, someone else is causing us this trouble, we must equally be able to sit on a table and look at how do we then resolve it by balancing the two parties. So I think it is high time that both parties come on the table and look at how do we support each other. For example, when we talk about that land, 100,000 hectares in Kenya or in Uganda is easily available. Clean energy is easily available. You know, a good example is 4 weeks ago, I was in Uganda, joined the president of Uganda in launching Karuma Dam, which has around 320 megawatts. Now, mind you, more than a month down the line, that power is going to waste because it's above Uganda's consumption. And this is clean hydro power. Now, that hydro power, that 300 plus megawatts, can easily be used for that. And actually where Karuma Dam is situated, this is where River Nile passes through, there is more than 500,000 hectares of land that is underutilized. So we must be able to look at advantages and disadvantages, compare the strength of each one of us. Now, the virtue that, if you look at most of the borrowing in Kenya today, but the last 10 years is Chinese. You know, we've borrowed more of Chinese, Japan, IMF, the World Bank generally. But if we look at our strengths and use that as a balancing fact, then we can be able to come back on the table and have what we call the comparative advantage between the money and the availability of the resources and ability to resolve the issue of climate change.
Thank you very much for this. Now, we are all witnessing these extreme, almost biblical weather events almost every week all around the world. We've had these massive floods in Valencia in Spain, where the population was so disgusted that they threw mud at the king, who went to show sympathy and empathy to the population. But the situation was so bad, they said they couldn't care less. They couldn't care less about the king. They couldn't care less about Spain. They were in such a terrible fate. You've just told us that we have this drought in Zambia where they have zero production. We had floods in 2014 in Serbia, where a great proportion of the country was underwater. And when Helen Grant, the head of UNDP, came and I was hosting her, she said to me, don't think that this will not be repeated in a few years, again, maybe even worse. So my question to all of you, and first to Professor Pollitt and then Ambassador of Brazil, is wouldn't the gravity of these enormous extreme weather events wake up people, where even a doubting President Trump who doesn't believe in climate change, if he gets confronted with an enormous, once, like the hurricane in New Orleans, but 10 times worse, wouldn't that be a wake-up call? And wouldn't that be maybe that sort of miracle that people, that concentrates people and the international community to say we have to work together? Professor and then Ambassador.
I think there's nothing like a good crisis, isn't there, to galvanize politicians into action. I think clearly the problem that we have with climate policy is inertia. That we've got this energy system, it's been built up over many years, it's been very successful at doing what it was set up to do. And it's built the global economy. The whole industrialized world is built on cheap fossil fuels. So yeah, one would hope that these biblical events, as you put it, would wake people up. But of course, the problem with a wake up is they don't necessarily lead to the right conclusions to be drawn. I think, when I actually, in answer to the question, what should emerging markets do that makes them react in a better way to problems is the things that promote economic development. What promotes economic development, particularly in the area of energy, is a commitment to markets, to having market pricing of energy, to having proper pricing of the carbon externality, participating in global energy markets. It's about having proper infrastructure and making sure you build the right infrastructure in a timely way. And it's about having the right institutions. It's about having a proper regulatory agency, having a proper planning agency, having functioning levels of government where people feel that the government is behaving competently, which of course will help. What happened in Spain was a failure of government, wasn't it? To respond quickly to what was going on. If you have the right institutions in place, you're likely to respond more sensibly to a problem. If you have poor institutions in place, that seems less likely. I mean, you know, some of the statistics that we could have spoken about, all of the analysis of climate change says, you know, as countries get richer, surprise, surprise, they get, in general, apart from American exceptionalism, but even that's not necessarily true at every state, you know, people are more interested in climate. You know, they're more interested in the local quality of the local environment. They're more interested in signing up to environmental policies. So, you know, if we want the world to change, then of course we also want to promote economic development, because that's what causes people to get interested in doing stuff about the climate and, you know, dealing with existential problems. So we shouldn't neglect, you know, the bread and butter of developing a better energy governance system. You know, so that would be where I would start with that.
Ambassador, Brazil, as I said, is one of the global champions in the fight against climate change and has been that for over 30 years. You have told us that you are getting more than 80% of your energy from renewable sources, which is really something that has to be is commendable and should be congratulated. But you are also telling us, which surprised me, that your greatest emission is coming from the forests. So I think you might have also had in recent years extreme weather events also in Brazil. But you're a country that is aware. You're very much aware. But do you think, like in the Latin American continent, there is enough solidarity and cognizance that we all have together and fight this scourge?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because it involves the capacity of people to actually come together to solve a problem before the problem arises. And this is exactly this is exactly what we began doing in 92. This is exactly the exercise that we've been doing since the Rio 92 conference and the subsequent COP conferences that have been organized since then. The idea is to move from that everyone for himself, the Wild West image that I painted to you. Now we have an organized system where we try to address the issues to the best of our ability with the assistance of the science that is being fed to us. How fast are things moving? Should we accelerate negotiations? Should we, if the financial sector is not willing to create a fund of $100 billion a year, as was mentioned in Copenhagen, what should we do? We are finding solutions. We are presenting solutions. Solutions are being presented on the table. As I mentioned to you, the financial sector has signaled that if we include in our development programs your country and mine, Serbia, if you include projects which are targeting the improvement of your emissions, or greenhouse emissions, if you are presenting projects which include stabilizing your energy constraints, all of this should attract the attention of major investors. So this is something that we are convincing, and this is the exercise that we're doing in Baku, and we will be certainly doing in Berlin next year. and even before that, now in G20 next week and the BRICS Plus meeting before Belém. Now, the issue here is what is Serbia going to do? What are you as civil society going to get organized and find a solution, present a solution? What do you think can be done with the resources that you have? And this is something that can be done. There is a solution that can solve some of your constraints in transportation. So as I said, 88% of our energy matrix, if you consider electricity only, is renewable, thanks to the simple fact that we have a very, very strong hydropower network of plants, the largest in the world. We have also 14% of the world's sweet water. That's another reason why we have so many hydroelectric plants. But we have diminished, as I said previously, we saved over these years $800 billion in imports of oil-derived products from overseas by introducing the biofuels program in our country. And you can do this with the excess biomass you have in your country. So this is a solution that you can present to your officials, to your government people. We have been speaking with your governments. They are interested. They will be going to Brazil to try to understand how we are working with this. And I believe that this is an alternative. By the way, as I said, both diesel, biodiesel, and ethanol emit 80 to 90% less greenhouse gases than regular synthetic diesel and gasoline. The air quality of the city of São Paulo in Brazil, which has 8 million vehicles and one of the largest cities in the world, is the position of the city in terms of quality of the air is 1,738, while Belgrade, it's around 300, if I'm not mistaken. So it's up to you to decide whether you want this program or not. It's up to you to pressure your government people to try to move in this direction if you feel that this is a priority here. And there is a segment of civil society participation, which, by the way, is the majority of the delegates which would attend Belém will be from the civil society. Perhaps it is time that you have a large delegation coming to Belém to present your solutions, your recommendations to your government authorities. So this is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Your message is loud and clear. When the Agenda for Sustainable Development was being negotiated and I was participating in New York, that was the novelty. Before, all of these negotiations were intergovernmental, but with the agenda, it was really the participation of NGOs from the whole world. We had academia, we had chambers of commerce, we had women groups, youth groups. The inclusion of everybody is very, very important. Brian, at the Africa Climate Summit, there was a lot of interest in Kenya. You are a leading country in East Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa. As I said, all the global leaders of the world were there. I remember that the German government gave some kind of donation for green hydrogen. But are you really sensing that the developed countries are really prepared to help? Because I still feel that there is a hesitancy from the North to give the necessary money. We're talking now even over $1 trillion US dollars is necessary, and there seems to be a hesitancy, and some of the developed countries are sort of saying, oh, why should we do it alone? There are some also rich developing countries. Why doesn't China help? Why doesn't Saudi Arabia help? And things like that. Are you feeling that the North is really ready to help, or is it's just them talking?
As I said earlier, there is more talk than action. And the good thing is, or the positive side, or the optimistic side of it is, if Brazil can do it, then it is possible. But if it is possible, the question is, how will it be done? And you rightfully put it. There is a feeling of what I would call passing the ball. Passing the ball on the basis that when you touch one, it's the issue of, come on, yeah, we've been doing it, but even the other one is doing it. China has come up, they are even probably doing worse than us. Can they also come in? Now, we had a conference in Kenya last year, the Africa Climate Summit. Extremely and very well attended from every corner of the world. Generally, every nation was very well represented. So many decisions and agreements and promises and agreements were made. Now it's actually 1 year down the line since we had the Africa Climate Summit. And I took time as we prepared the road to Baku to look at what have we achieved based on those decisions that were made last year during the Africa Climate Summit. And the sad part of it is not even 20% of them have been achieved 1 year down the line. Now, I feel, or there is a feeling that we are more into making the promises. We are more into that particular sitting coming up with an answer than actually. When it comes to action, now comes in the issue of, the other one is doing, I am doing, he is doing, we will do, why can't he do? But how do we answer this question? Ambassador has put it very well, and I started by giving an example of the coal project in Lamu. Now, the citizen rejected that project. Of course, led by the civil society, they rejected the project. As a government, then, we had our bit, pushing in terms of the question of how many jobs have, because we were weighing on the table looking at how many jobs are we creating, but the citizenry refused. They stood their ground. They said no. And when we went to sit down with them, because at one point they went to court and the court guided that we sit with the people and reason. And I was lucky to attend a couple of those sittings of the public participation, as we call it back in Kenya. And the people using their day-to-day lives gave us the reasons why they felt they were not ready for anything else that would tamper with the climate, even another one step forward. And the people gave us examples of the fishing they used to do 5-10 years ago. Those fish are not there anymore. They gave us, what the honey they used to harvest out of the mangrove plantations at the coasts, because Lamu falls in the Kenyan coastal. They are no longer there. Now, they took that step. What does that mean? Serbia, just like Kenya, we share a lot of things in common. We have a lot of commonality between Kenya and Serbia. I believe if an alliance and common-minded countries stood together, just like the people of Lamu stood and told the government and the Chinese investors that no, this project, as much as you're telling us that it has benefits, it will not happen here. If today we are seated here, I arrived this morning from Kenya, ambassador from Brazil, ambassador from here in Serbia, people from the UK and other places. If in the same spirit, we stood our ground, joined our hands and spoke. For example, what was the reason behind organizing the African Climate Summit? Many of you might ask. The answer is simple. We realize that every time we go to COP, 54 presidents from Africa are given 2 minutes to address. Come on, what can you express in 2 minutes? You know, apart from greetings and reading a few lines in a speech, what would you address? It is on the basis of that under the leadership of His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, the President of Kenya, he thought and felt in consultation with the other African presidents that we need to come together, make a decision. What exactly do we want to present as the African Union? There you go. Rather than us going there, 54 of us, to present all of us, can we select 4 to go and present, the decision of the rest? Now, when we met last year, we sat down, 54 presidents, the couple, I think 20 or 30 attended, the others were represented by their prime ministers and ministers. Now, Africa Union, and a memorandum that was presented at the COP28. Similarly, they have a memorandum that is being presented to COP29. But the next thing is to broaden the alliance. It is to broaden the alliance outside of just the African Union. If today, Kenya or the African Union joined hands with Brazil, joined hands with Serbia, and we presented a similar position as we go now to COP30 in Brazil, I believe even the big boys or whoever it is that we need to have listening to this conversation will participate and will listen. But we must also be able to be proactive, not necessarily by sitting down, and because like for us in Kenya, we asked ourselves, and it's the same conversation that we're having in Kenya and Uganda now, that even as we champion and push to be listened to, do we just sit, fold our hands, and wait to be listened to? The answer is no. That is why we've said, for example, in Kenya, we have the 15 billion tree program in the next 10 years. In Uganda, we are launching another 15 billion tree in the same 10-year period. Because we need to be proactive. But even as we are being proactive, we need now to push, because the reality of the matter is, if I will have my village mates plant a tree, assuming a seedling is $1, a bigger chunk of our population live below $2 a day. Now, naturally, given an opportunity to plant a tree and an opportunity to eat, I believe we all would agree that the first choice would be to eat. So it is our duty to be able to petition the people causing this trouble to come in and fill that gap, because it is easier for me to convince my village mate to plant that tree. But as I convince the village mate, he is asking me now, as I go buy the seedling, will I eat? Which one do I do first? Do I eat or do I go buy a seedling? But if I'm able to give that village mate of mine a solution, which is partly what exactly we are doing now, for example, with the program that I'm running of the 4 billion trees, is creating a reward scheme to that village farmer, so that when he plants his 10 or 20 or 30 trees, he's able to receive a reward, which commensurates with the cost of the seedling, and he makes a margin. Then there's a motivation. But if I look at the amount, the cost of that money when I go to bank, for example, to borrow that money from that China or IMF or World Bank or the rest, it's very expensive. And it is not factoring in the question that I am resolving a problem that is actually not my doing. I'm resolving a problem that is someone else is doing. So we must have more of these conversations, even as we gear towards, because now COP29 is there, quite a lot of push in the next few days. But even as we prepare now for COP30, we need to have more of these conversations, not isolated to Serbia. And that's why I'm really happy with the organization of the event, that you thought outside the box to get the representation from both sides of the divide. So that if we have more of these conversations, and by the time we are walking into COP30, we have a more bigger alliance that is speaking the same language, then we have a better chance of not being crybabies, but solving the problem.
Thank you very much. Very inspirational words, Brian. In my mind, the greatest debate and the greatest dilemma, which has been mentioned basically by you all, is summed up in your word of the farmer, of the poor Kenyan farmer who says, should I plant a tree or should I eat? And then he favors eating. And this is just like Professor Pollitt was mentioning in China, when the Chinese say, we're going to continue building coal-fired power plants because we have so many workers, and what are we going to do if we don't do it? But at the end of the day, this is threatening our civilization. And it's an incredible, difficult dilemma. We are faced with these problems in Serbia on a daily basis. You all know our challenges. 7 years ago, before I was posted to Africa, I took a trip to Golubac, and then I was going up a hill, and I saw these windmills. And I said, oh my God, I didn't know that we have them in Serbia. And actually, they were in Romania. Because it's just across the river, it was Romania. Then I spent more than 6 years in Kenya. I came back. We have quite a few wind parks, and we have solar ones. We are, and the cognizance is increasing. This conference is a part of our awareness that something has to be done. But the challenges are very, very serious. They're very difficult. But thank you for bearing with us, and you can all go home and relax. But thank you very much.
Well, as Dragan just said, looks like we came to the end for today. Thank you to all of our panelists and moderators for their invaluable contributions today. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to your active participation throughout this inspiring day. As we conclude this first day of Sustainable Development Forum, I encourage you to reflect on the discussions and ideas shared, and I hope you leave feeling inspired and motivated for the journey ahead. We look forward to welcoming you back tomorrow for another day of engaging sessions and thought-provoking conversations. Until then, have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.